Hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're logging on from. I'm Jessica Driscoll and I'm from Digital Catapult, and I'm thrilled to be chairing the panel today, Out of the Chaos into the Fire. So a tiny bit of background about me. I look after immersive technology at Digital Catapult. We're a centre for advanced digital technology innovation, and we drive early adoption of these advanced technologies through lab and testbed facilities, accelerator programmes, connecting UK SMEs to large enterprise, helping to grow the digital economy. So what have we learned from the breadth and depth of creative output from the pandemic, and how do we ensure that the best of this innovation is retained and continues to be developed as we enter the next phase of the pandemic? I'm thrilled tonight to introduce my fellow panelists who've all been involved in really exciting research and projects and done some pretty heroic pivoting and responses to the pandemic. So it's going to be great to find out what is going to stick after this period. Right, first things first, I'm going to hand over to introduce, they're going to introduce themselves. So can I start with Florian?
Hi everybody, I'm Florian Block. I'm a reader in digital creativity at the University of York, and I'm the R&D director of Weavr, which is the Audience of the Future sports demonstrator.
Thanks, Florian. Haz, how about you?
Hi everyone, my name is Dullul and I am a filmmaker, director and producer specifically. I've worked on 2 feature films, both have been on Netflix, and I directed and executive produced a show called Fast Lane on Disney+. I'm currently deep in production of my 3rd feature film, which is completely animated.
Excellent, thank you. Sarah, could you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Sarah Ellis. I'm Director of Digital Development at the Royal Shakespeare Company and Project Director for the Audience of the Future Live Performance Demonstrator. We're currently in production or running the show Dream, which we hope some South by Southwest audiences will have seen. And so we're at the heart of the chaos and the fire at the moment.
Excellent, thank you. And last but by no means least, Conor.
Hi, my name is Conor Roach. I'm Director at BOP Consulting, a consulting practice that specializes in the culture and creative industries.
Excellent, thank you. So to kick off today and to kind of frame the discussion, I'm going to invite Conor to talk a little bit about what the Audience of the Future programme is, what did it seek to achieve, and give us a bit of a summary of the wider market analysis and the broader international opportunities from the BOP research. So Conor, you've got the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. So the Audiences of the Future programme, which has been referenced a couple of times already, is a £33 million UK government investment programme to support the UK to develop its creative immersive technologies sector. The intention of the programme is to support the UK to become the world leader in this area, or a world leader in this area in the next few years, and also to support and grow the talent in the workforce needed to create immersive content and to increase private investment in immersive technology in the country. My company was involved in carrying out an evaluation and is currently in the process of doing an ongoing review of the Audience of the Future programme. But as part of that process, we did a scan of the international immersive technologies industry with an intention to understand the demand and the uptake of the immersive creative industries space, the technologies, the levels and the areas of investment, and the barriers to growth. So I just want to give a brief summary of some of our findings from that scan and to summarize very broadly the opportunities and the challenges for the industry that we found going forward. First, a disclaimer. So this work was very broad in scope, and consequently it can't cover all the areas necessary and the depth required to give a comprehensive market study, particularly as the industry remains in flux. This analysis also happened pre-COVID. The world is very different in the midst of COVID and will be post-COVID. I've attempted to bring a lot of the data up to date, but as we can discuss later, the impact from COVID remains uncertain. So some of the top line findings. So AR as a technology, as a development platform, as a format, as a content type, is set to dominate the immersive creative industries. In 2018, the VR segment was estimated to be the largest segment, with accounting for over 50% of the industry. However, there appears consensus that AR will dominate going forward, and there's projections that AR could account for over 90% of the industry in the next couple of years. And there's a number of reasons for the projected dominance of AR. AR it's more portable and has a lighter technology overhead. And the rollout of 5G is likely to drive greater availability of portable AR applications and services. VR still remains expensive, and while standalone VR headsets have been very successful in recent times, most headsets still remain tethered to supporting hardware, although this is obviously shifting. Distribution platforms for AR have already converged to the Apple App Store and Android's Google Play Store, and Apple is likely to release some class of an AR headset, which has been described as a hero device for the industry. And this will bring AR headsets into the mainstream. In line with this, investment trends are already starting to shift from VR, with money going into computer vision and AR related technologies. So just moving into the creative industry specifically. So the creative industry markets are set to account for approximately half of the industry, with video games unsurprisingly the largest sector. And there's no surprises here. Although it is heartening to understand that the scale of the potential industry, if you are a content creator and someone working in the creative space. Now, according to the data that we looked at, consumer spending in 2017 on creative applications, including gaming and entertainment, contributed to over about 30% of the entire immersive industry revenues, with revenues specifically from creative industry related applications likely to account for about 50%, so it'll grow substantially. And this is a significant portion of an industry that, according to research, is likely to grow to anywhere in the realms of $160 billion plus. But a significant word of caution here: the film industries was valued at over around $40 billion US last year, and there's a lot of things that need to happen before the immersive space sort of realizes that growth. Games is already the largest immersive technology sector within the sort of creative immersive space, with 90% of VR owners using headsets to play games. And Pokemon Go, the big success, having mainstream breakthroughs with revenues last year alone of over $1 billion. That's for a mobile VR AR game, and that's $4 billion across the lifespan of the game. So that's very, very massive success. Of course, there's likely to be positive spillover between the other sectors. So other sectors within the creative industries will benefit from the gaming sector's success. For example, music, set design, performing artists, and non-linear script writers. And we can talk a little bit about this later. So that's the broader sort of creative industries picture. And I want to spend a little bit of time just speaking about China and its likely impact on the industry. In China, in 2019, represents about 10% of the immersive industries. And I note that China has already the second largest film and video games industries internationally, recently surpassing the US at #1 for the video game space, but I'm sure that's due to swap again. And led by China, Asia is set to dominate the consumption of AR and VR content over the next few years. And it's projected to drive more revenue than North America and Europe combined, which is massive considering. With China the single largest market for immersive globally. So why is this the case? The following government policy, local governments across the country have established what in China are called government-backed guidance funds for immersive. Essentially, these funds provide matched investment for private investment in private companies. Whatever a private investor invests in, the government then matches. And this provides greater security and less risk for private investors, and of course, increases investment in the sector overall. And since that guidance from government, investment in immersive, unsurprisingly, has exploded in the country, and China leads global investment in immersive technologies and has done so for the last few years. And there's an opportunity here for international producers of this content in China, because unlike in the UK, China tends to be a net importer of content and content-based IP. They don't tend to have the training and the experienced domestic talent or the infrastructure to produce quality content. And there's lots of historical reasons for this. That might change, but it could take a long time. And if the video games industry is anything to go by, the content that China will produce will tend to be at sort of low production values, but that's good for international producers that want to export internationally. And one of the reasons why consumption is likely to be higher in China than anywhere else is that there tends to be a tendency towards higher adoption of new technologies. The Chinese tend to be enthusiastic earlier adopters of technology, even if the technology isn't yet perfect. In China, theme parks and cafes and shopping malls have made high-end headsets available for years, so the market is already primed. And finally, there's anticipated to be earlier and greater uptake for 5G in China. And the reasons for this is that pre-5G connectivity in China is much slower than 4G connectivity in, say, for example, the UK, making access to HD video, let alone immersive content, very difficult in China. And this suggests that there is a latent and pent-up demand for 5G in China. So with this in mind, China's major telecoms are all investing big in 5G and using immersive to try to sell subscriptions. So China's going large on immersive, and many international producers and distributors and manufacturers are already benefiting. Interestingly, Facebook's Oculus is the most popular headset. It outsells its Chinese rivals in China. So it's outselling Chinese manufactured and Chinese developed headsets, and its market share is increasing. And the success of Oculus in China has helped Oculus become the global headset leader. Interestingly, on Valve's Steam platform, the Chinese language is the largest language demographic, larger than in English language with option, which is very interesting. So finally, I just want to quickly talk about some of the broader challenges and the growth for immersive, the challenges for growth that we found. Just back to China quickly. So China has very strict laws in terms of censoring and regulating, and the distribution of foreign content is heavily regulated and prohibited or limited, should I say. And it's likely that immersive content will need to adhere to the same sort of restrictive laws and regulatory issues. And this is something that international producers will need to overcome. Chinese user data access and portability of that data beyond China is prohibited. So this makes it very difficult for producers to collect data on their users without having to set up local data infrastructure in the country. And of course, the cost of doing business in China has a particular overhead, a specific overhead. And this overhead can be prohibitive to small creative producers. But beyond China, and some of the other challenges for creative immersive content, the revenues still are lacking for this space. And the revenues that are there predominantly come from gaming. And this is driven by premium standalone VR experiences. And there remains a limited amount of content available in the market, coupled with expensive headsets and hardware setups. The business model is uncertain for producers. And this means the market is growing tentatively, with many developers and producers are waiting for sort of greater adoption before they enter the market and produce new titles. Also, advertisers are not willing to spend the amount of money needed to create bespoke immersive content, particularly of a quality that reflects sort of upmarket brands and publishers that have big budgets. For advertisers and brands, the benefits of immersive over video are still unclear. And as I mentioned earlier, this hero device is still lacking. There's the lacking of a hero headset, an everyday use case for immersive. There's no standout AR or VR or mixed reality headset yet. Now, while there are a number of leading headset developers, we mentioned Oculus earlier, none have become standard in their class. And this lack of a so-called hero device is hindering content development. And so the sector needs, much like the app development sector needed an iPhone to kickstart and to give the market impetus. And finally, the fallout from COVID is still uncertain. It's too early to project what the fallout from COVID is, with many location and site-specific applications and experiences will obviously have suffered greatly. And a few on this panel, I'm sure, can attest to that. But there is evidence that online applications and experiences, virtual live events, immersive films, etc., will have had a boost during COVID. And VR headsets spiked last year during the first lockdown in Europe on this side of the world. But will that interest in immersive experiences sustain once we're all allowed to be back in a room together and go back to gigs and shows? That waits to be seen, and we can discuss that. So that's a very broad sweep of the international creative immersive industries, but I hope that gives a taster to where the research says the industry is going. So thank you for listening, and Jessica, I'll hand back to you.
Brilliant, thanks for that, Conor. I think that sets the context really, really well. I think what I'd love to do now is to invite the fellow panelists to give a short kind of elevator pitch about what you've been doing and the kind of pivots you've been making, just to further set the context again, and then we're going to jump into some questions for everybody, and then also take questions during the Q&A. So can I start off with Sarah? Sarah, tell everyone, what have you been up to? Because it's very exciting.
Gosh, what have we been up to? So the Audience of the Future live performance demonstrator is what we've been doing over the past, wow, goodness, few years, but obviously we're affected by the pandemic quite significantly. It's a collaboration between 14 partners, a beautiful collection of arts organisations, technology partners and research partners, universities, to explore the future of live performance. And we were due to do a performance in last summer in June in Stratford-upon-Avon, and as soon as the pandemic, we had to completely stop production. We had to grieve that moment. We were using cutting-edge immersive technologies, including headsets, real-time technologies using the Unreal game engine, video projection mapping, and we had to completely reimagine what this experience could be for audiences at home or remote audiences. We profoundly shifted what was possible in such a short space of time. But I believe we've created a piece for now, and we've created something that is genuinely a statement of intent around the future of live performance. In that pivot that we did, exploring Shakespeare's play A Midsummer Night's Dream, and we've created a performance called Dream that's inspired by it. We did a huge piece of audience research to help us pivot to that. And in that audience research, it was overwhelming that audiences wanted togetherness and liveness. And we know that that's what live performance and theatre and festivals and music does best. We also found out there was a huge digital inequity in people's homes. And when we look at immersive technology, when we look at these new adoption of technologies, headsets, really, big high-powered PCs, they are not available to everyone. And as we move to the future of live performance using immersive tech, we have to really take a beat and make sure that we are not repeating old siloed ways of working, and that our statement of intent around these technologies is inclusive, accessible, and use and allows people to imagine regardless of who they are and where they are. So it was really important in this pandemic that we spoke to that. So Dream is available on desktop, mobile, and tablet. It could be made for VR and AR in the future. We hope that's the case. But what's really important is the immersive technologies and the interactivity going into it are cutting edge. We're using real-time motion capture, making everything in an Unreal game engine, moving that and distributing that out via a web player, and a level of interactivity through WebGL. It's a glorious feat in one of the most profoundly difficult times for live performance, and we hope sparks huge amount of conversation and debate and investment in the future of live performance.
Thanks, Sarah. That was a really great summary. And I think to a much lesser extent, I know how you feel about having to pivot something. At Digital Catapult, in collaboration with Arts Council, we have our Creative XR Showcase, trying to show 20 cutting edge prototypes to guests all around the world without being able to see them physically was enough of a pivot for me, I think. And I dread to think what you guys went through on your pivot, but it all turned out well in the end, I think. Florian, can I ask you to give a little summary about what you've been doing and how you've pivoted?
Yeah, of course. As I mentioned, we are the sports demonstrator. But we look at sports through the lens of esports, so electronic sports. So any form of competitive video game that is played online and that is viewed by audiences. And a lot of people don't know this, but over 500 million people have watched esports last year. And the interesting thing is that our remit from the start has been the remote viewer, because in sports, the commercial and cultural impact focuses on the remote. You know, there's 500 million Manchester United fans, but only 20,000 fit into the stadium. So that's and the same is true, really holds true for esports, maybe even more, because broadcasts are inherently global. So I think what happened with COVID is that, you know, when all the sports and sort of our pitch is that we use we bring together in immersive technology. And what we wanted really to push is to create an immersive experience space along a live game. And since that is play by play and can't be quote unquote authored or produced with conventional means, we use AI and data-driven technology to create these experience spaces, so remote fans can dive into analyses and into personalized commentary that is sort of tailored to everyone's interest, and that do so across the web, mobile phones, augmented reality experience, and virtual reality. So that is the original scope, and that has pretty much stayed the same. You know, we're really quite fortunate that, you know, when all the sports suspended operation, esports not just continued to operate, but had a huge boost in popularity because everyone was just bored out of their mind. And so, so that was a great opportunity. So part of the pivot was to capture some of that added opportunity, and we've expanded into a second esports as well. Now, the other thing, though, is, and that's what was unintuitive to many people, is that while it's easy to play these games from remotely and even bringing the viewer remotely, the actual creative workflows underlying esports productions have not just adapted overnight to being remote. And in fact, in contrast to the TV industry and traditional broadcasts, we actually have developed fully virtualized, fully remote workflows now. So with our partners, and you know, obviously the consortium is led by ESL, the largest global producer of esports content, and a set of fantastic organizations, including Doc10, Future Visual, Focal Point VR, Cybula, and the research we do at the University of York. You know, we're able to put together workflows and creative tools that allowed essentially people, whole production crews to produce, you know, much like this workshop is produced, but including replays, including multiple camera angles, like a proper multi-studio completely remotely through software solutions. And so that was a part of the pivot. And the third thing was that we did want to apply our technology to sports. So last but not least, the added time gives us an opportunity to catch up on some of the really exciting opportunities in virtual and in 360 video capture, for instance, and in applying our techniques to football, for instance. Now with the sports booting back up, we can capture that opportunity. Sorry, that was a long one, but I always spend 3 minutes to explain what esports are. So here you go. I take that as a bonus. Sorry.
That was great, Florian. Thank you. There's some really interesting points that I want to pick up again later when we talk about the the aftermath and what actually will stick from the kind of remote production workflow that you talked about. Talking about virtual production in particular, over to you. Tell us what you've been up to and how you've been pivoting.
Very smooth, Jessica. Nicely transitioned there. Okay, so I think for me, it's best to start from like 2019. Don't worry, it's not going to be a big thing. So basically, 2019, I was supposed to be in my, prepping for my next feature film, my third feature film, right? Having like 2018, having a whirlwind, having 2 movies out on Netflix, doing a TV show, I kind of got FOMO, feeling missing out. And, there's the whole development process you take as a production company, especially an independent production company like my company, Hazfilm. We don't have huge budgets to have infrastructure and huge teams, a development team. So we go through tons of scripts. And we were prepping to shoot our next film for like 2020 or this year, 2021. Obviously, COVID hit. And it hit really hard. And we realized, a lot of financiers, investors, distribution companies, but most importantly, the actual talent, the actors, wouldn't fly from LA to Spain where we were going to shoot. So we quickly had to think, how do we stay in business in terms of how do we continue telling stories? And from a filmmaker's point of view, how do I continue telling high concept genre stories, which is the science fiction films I like to tell, without, being locked up in a house and waiting for studios to open? And Love, Death and Robots had come out, had done its thing, and it kind of opened the doors for adult animation. And the interesting thing is that every year I would go to Los Angeles, like 5 times a year, you know, clock up those air miles. 5 times a year I'll go to Los Angeles, and we'll pitch in tons of projects, and we'll always pitch animation. And we'll get like, no, you can't, no, we're not gonna do animation, or it's too expensive, or you need the infrastructure, you need to be Pixar, a huge infrastructure. So I'll always have these animation projects like, oh, one day when I've done 6 movies or something. And so when the COVID hit, we looked at these high concept projects, and we're like, and oh, by the way, forgot to mention, but at the same time, we were doing previs. So previs is basically a moving storyboard using computer graphics in 3D, you know, to plan out your shots, you know, quite a useful thing to do in films. And we were using Unreal Engine to do that. So I was using Unreal Engine, which is a video game engine they use for games like Fortnite and tons of video games, but also use Mandalorian for the LED screens. I was using it for doing previs, and I quickly realized after a week of using it, like the quality I was getting out of Unreal Engine, like in real time, you know, like reflections, explosions, you know, high fidelity graphics. You know, I started my career in visual effects for 15, 20 years ago. And that, you know, kind of shows my age. And basically to do the level of doing the level of quality of graphics that we're doing in Unreal Engine today would have taken forever to do, like tons of rendering, tons of resources. So a light bulb moment hit, and me and my business partners were like, well, why don't we use Unreal Engine to create final content? You know, final pixels. What that means is there is no post-processing. It's straight at the engine, in the edit, out you go, and do a voiceover and narration. So we did a couple of projects last year. One of them is Mutant Year Zero, which ended up now becoming a big feature film in development in LA. It's a huge project. And we started to think, well, what can we do within a small company, within our small resources, with the royalties and the profits we had made on our first movie, The Beyond, that one there, that's still making money today. What could we do? And we decided to go ahead and make our first animated film out of Unreal Engine, which is what we're doing right now. You know, the post of Akira in the back kind of gives it away, the style it is. But we're in production on an animated sci-fi action animated film, and we deliver in September. Now, if I was to say this to someone, you know, or tell myself that a year ago, I'd be like, that's insane. Who does an animated film? You know, the pitch for that film, by the way, is The Raid meets Akira. I mean, it's insane. It's 4K. It's bombastic. You read the script, you're like, that's unshootable. But we're able to do that. And it's because of accessibility of things like Unreal Engine, virtual production, but also, I don't know, there's something about the community of creatives using this technology has just opened up. Everyone is sharing stuff. Like I learned Unreal Engine watching YouTube videos, by the way. So we're in a very exciting place at the moment. We're in production, and we feel as a business opportunity, as filmmaking opportunities, there's a lot of opportunities now of animation. Animation isn't just reserved for the big studios anymore. The indie filmmakers can now play in animation, tell their stories, and that's exciting.
Wow, well, it sounds like you three are very much still in the chaos, and you haven't even got into the fire yet. Maybe we should have another follow-up panel for when we've all kind of gotten over being burnt in the fire. But thanks for that, Haz. That was really great. Okay, I want to kind of throw this question out to, maybe I'll throw it to Sarah first. What do you think has been the most exciting and unexpected outcome of the last 12 months? I've been kind of watching from the sidelines and getting various tidbits from people involved in Dream and lots of interesting insights. But what would you think was the most exciting and unexpected thing?
I think when we were looking at the future of live performance, we were still quite siloed. So we were looking about it as film, or is it a piece of theatre, or is it music? And one of the unexpected, really wonderful things is that by making it, we're realizing that there's new forms coming through. And I find that super interesting and exciting. And I think it's for many other people in the community to work on that with us and take that forward. And looking at all the different ways of working, you just make cultural assumptions about the way that you make work is the way that everyone makes work. And it's just not true. So we've had this real sort of alchemy of process. And I think that going forward, we'll sit with that for a bit and really look at what that means. The other unexpected delight, which when you talk about it, you go, well, of course, that's not unexpected. That's absolutely necessary, was as soon as Dream hit an audience, that alchemy is phenomenal. And it's just, we've had so many challenging moments over the past year of, would we make this? Could we make this? We always looked each other in the eye, and there were so many people that needed to make a piece of work right now. And one of the unexpected highlights was actually how much the audience is needed to be with work and be excited about the work, and we can't do it without them. And you know, we have a sort of a clock, a tick. It's a ticker which says how many people are joining, and you can feel people showing up. And so a real unexpected outcome was people are showing up. We are together, we are connected, and we're also experiencing something we know is putting something out there that we don't quite know where it will travel. And we're all curious and we're all excited. And I hope as we emerge through this pandemic, we will emerge in that way. And that's such an unexpected delight. So I'm so curious about what we found. We have lost so much, but I'm really curious about how we all show up going forward. I think that's an unexpected delight for me personally.
It's really interesting because I'm hearing a lot of words like community, togetherness, you know, and that combined experience and that shared experience, even though we have been remote, which is, it's really nice. And it's nice to feel that from everyone on the panel as well. Florian, that probably resonates a lot with you, given the fact that you've had high audience number on trials and your Manchester United football analogy. What's been the most exciting thing for you? Because that might not have been so surprising for your demonstrator.
Well, I mean, I think it's very much in the vein of what Sarah says, but, you know, I take sort of I'll focus it on the creative aspect. I think what we all learned, and I think this goes beyond and evidently from the outside in the other projects, is that you know, creative workflow, creativity is extremely resilient, and the desire and drive in people to be creative and to engage creatively as a form of collaboration, right? Because it gives you a subject to give meaning to interaction. And, you know, it's almost like creativity is a means of survival. I mean, you know, most in our team have been very lucky and you know, avoided really dire consequences of the virus. But I would say that to me, it was just fascinating to see how people keep on going and keep on doing great stuff and push themselves, you know, and how all this missed energy of face-to-face interaction seems to almost want to come out and trickle in. So I think to me that was very, very amazing. And then the not so surprising thing was that, believe it or not, video game nerds, some of them didn't even realize there was a lockdown. they don't leave the house anyway. No, I'm joking, of course. That's the stereotype. But, you know, we also felt, and you know, this is maybe one more thing I wanted to say, is that playing games together it is an inherent form of interaction. And so what our teams have done a lot, we've come together on Discord, which is a gaming voice platform that you can just drop in and out of. We've played games together every Friday. You know, it's just been fun. And I think that's, to me, also has sort of restored my faith in the role of specifically video games. But I think it ties exactly into sort of interaction between audience and creatives as well, that Sarah has pointed out. So that's me.
Brilliant. Yeah, I've been playing a lot of games too. A lot of walking around the neighborhood playing Pokemon Go with my son and playing a lot of Pokemon VR, lots and lots of things, because I haven't had to go and see my mother-in-law, but don't tell her, I don't think she's watching.
They should build in social distancing. When you get too close, they beep, 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 and
yes.
Hey, there's a Pokemon over here, Pokemon over there, run the other way.
Exactly, instead of me falling over my sofa. But Conor, how about you? What was the most surprising thing that you found when you were doing your research?
Well, I think Sarah alluded to this earlier, which is, you know, and my background is in the performing arts as well. And typically, or traditionally, the performing arts had been quite a siloed space to work in the past, you know, year plus or so. And the work that Sarah does tries to smash those silos, those barriers. And we've had in the last year or so a sort of a maturity of the sector where it's been forced then to experiment and look beyond its little world. And that's both in terms of its format, but also the geography. You know, if you're not, you know, close to a producer of theater, what, you know, can you get in the world? Can you get involved in the space, in the sector? And now, of course, the theater sector is going to have to and has had to experiment with all sorts of different technologies and formats and modes of performance. And that's brilliantly interesting. And there has been, and there will continue to be, hopefully as a result of all of this, a bleed from the video game space into the performing arts, and very importantly, the performing arts as a means of telling stories into the video game space. And of course, what is video game performing arts then in the future as they sort of continue to play with each other? And I think that's the most interesting thing that I have seen, is that sort of forced maturity and the forced experimentation. And you know, a lot of that will inevitably stick, and that's very exciting. And in terms of where these spaces are going and how it provides access and enables those who may otherwise have not thought of or been open to working in the performing arts or not had access to it to go there and to be a part of it. And that's been what's most exciting to me. In terms of post-pandemic, it'll be interesting to see what happens when we're all allowed to be back in rooms and sweat again, you know, listening to music or whatever. Or indeed go back to the bloody cinema, you know. And so I'm interested to see how we take the learnings from the last year into that context as well, and how we bleed and how we sort of merge the offline and the online worlds. And that's going to be interesting to see how that pans out.
Yeah, I think that hybridity is really, really interesting. And also something that you touched on, the flexibility of recruitment. You know, when people are working remotely, they can be somewhere else. Maybe that could accommodate people who are returning back to work, working mums, or people with disabilities that don't want to commute into central, wherever it is. So hopefully, you know, some of that will stick. And I think that people have realized that a lot of those processes were more robust than previously thought as well, which is good. Because I wouldn't describe the performing arts or creative sector as fragile in the slightest. You know, there's a lot of incredibly resilient people within this sector. Haz, how about you? What was the most surprising thing that you thought, apart from not being able to, you know, have your G&T on the plane to go to LA?
Oh God, there's so many. I mean, a lot of them, you know, you guys already mentioned, but I think for me, there's been a few. The first one being the speed of how tech has evolved over the last year or so. I mean, you know, for example, like if we wanted to do a motion capture session, you know, where someone puts on a suit and animate, you know, the sort of thing you see behind the scenes of Avatar or a big high budget movie, like we don't have to do that now. You know, we can buy a suit, or we can approach artists online, and everyone is sharing work. Everyone's like, you know, high-fiving, everyone's, oh, I love your work, and everyone's sharing. And like, you know, I've managed to collaborate with an artist in Florida. She's got her own motion capture suit. I saw it on Facebook virtual production group, what she was doing. She was a fan of my work, and we just like, hey, you know, we're doing a project. You have a mocap suit. Do you want to collaborate? Like, yeah, you know, this is the agreed budget. It's the time. I mean, I've got motion capture in my film, and you know, it's unbelievable. And the speed of the technology, because that wasn't available before. You had to go to a studio to do optical motion capture. Now it's all inertia suits, and they're just as good. The other thing also, having access to big name actors, like, you know, as a filmmaker, you always want to get the bigger name talent to attach to your movie so that people will watch your movie, right? Because the first thing everyone asks is that, who's in your movie? Regardless what the film's at, who's in it, right? And I find, like, you know, like I've just, I think it was December last year, I just wrapped on a episode for an anthology. It's going to come out probably end of this year or next year. And they're like little episodes, several directors. And I managed to get a fairly high profile actress in my project, because she was based in Vancouver. She has access to a studio down the road from her. She was prepping to be in another big HBO show. She goes in, does her thing for 2 hours. We're on Skype directing her. I have the video, she has the video. Within a couple of hours, she's done it. And I find that their agents and their representations, which usually you have to get through them first before you get to the actors, right? They're so much more open. Like, well, yeah, you know, my client is available and they need the work. But also they're up for doing it. And I find that's been so like exciting, because if it wasn't for the situation we're in, I'd probably have to fly out there to wherever they are, do the pitch and do the whole song and dance. So that's helped massively. But I find that, again, like I mentioned earlier about the fact that we're doing an animated feature film in the year, and you'll think, oh my God, that's going to be a lot of hard work. And it is a lot of hard work, but I think it's because of the people we have on board. I feel there is more, I mean, this is my personal opinion, but I feel the exciting thing is, I feel so much more collaboration is happening, because we have Gabby in Florida doing mocap. She's feeding stuff in. There's me creating all the shots. We have an artist creating the assets, and everyone is piping in and everyone's sharing. Everyone is seeing each other's work. Whereas in a traditional way, if you're a visual effects artist, you only get to see shots that you're working on, or you're very limited with interaction with the director or the bigger picture. And I feel like because of the technology of real time, yes, there's Unity, there's Unreal Engine, but, particularly Unreal Engine, because I'm using it, the virtual production element, I think that has played a huge part in enabling people to be so much more collaborative. And the work that we're getting for the short amount of time is just mind-boggling because the quality is just on par. That has been exciting massively.
Okay, that's great. So it feels a little bit like there's lots of things that the panelists would like to keep moving forward post-pandemic. If I could ask you to pick probably what do you think the most important thing is that will stick? That one thing that you think, yes, this was absolute gold and it came out of this crisis and we're going to keep that. Would it be Florian's fully remote production process? Did that cost a lot of money though? Could you set that up again in another way? That tool that you created, is that what you're going to keep? Sarah, would you continue doing these kind of more streamed out to international audiences? What's that one thing? Florian, can I throw that to you first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I definitely think that, there's something about travel and environmental impact and simply also comfort of contributors and audience. There's something, I think, even though we're all sick at the moment, there's really something comforting around working in your own space and on some days not, leaving the house. And, there's this economic aspect, cost savings of these workflows. They're simply cheaper. And, I think, like Has said, it enables new ways, and it allows it to bring in people that you'd normally not work with that are really on the other side of the planet or so. I think recruitment is going to get a whole lot easier in many tech companies. And I think families are going to be able to stay together, which as a, dual career person with a son, I very much appreciate, and I think just the detachment from location. I think I love coming back together, but I think I want to keep half of my life the way it's been. And I think in the consortium we're on the same page on that.
That's brilliant. I know what you mean. It's quite nice to be able to wear trainers and, soppy clothes and not have to worry and be like, I'll just turn the video off while you put a wash on. Sarah, how about you? I can see Sarah nodding at that.
Yeah, no, that I'll keep. Gosh, I think it's the connection points that I think we'll take forward. I think that because we've had constraint in our everyday and we've not been able to do things, we've had to find things a different way. And that's opened up more, if we look at it as a glass half full, not dismissing the huge challenges that we've had in this time, because I think it's important to put it in context. But I think through the constraint, we have found other things. And so when we look at commercialization of this work, for example, actually we've led that through experience, not necessarily commerce, and that's really interesting. So some of the things that we've learned through Dream is that we found through the experience that we can find a business model. And that's really, really interesting. The way we can participate is much more like world building and how we bring people into that world and how it does have a value, it has a commercial value. And if we look at the challenges that we've had in the live performance sector around what we've lost commercially and how we will need to regrow that, that's an urgent question. And it's an urgent, non-negotiable question for us going forward. So for me, that's what we need to keep hold of. And we need to hold that really, really carefully and respectfully as we emerge through this moment, over the next 5-10 years.
Thank you. That's brilliant. That's a very, very, very salient point. And Has, how about you? What's the one thing that you'd like to keep?
I think for me, it's the ability to share. I think that has been a big thing that I've noticed since we've all had to work on, like online. Like I'm finding social media, like artists, directors, producers, performers, anyone in the arts industry are sharing much more now. This whole embargo thing, where distributors or executives are like, no, you can't show it until the trailer's out. Whereas now I find that, you have to share more. You have to keep your audience, keep them hyped. And that, if anything, that not only hypes up your audience, that inspires other filmmakers. You know, like I get inspired looking at other filmmakers. Oh my God, this is amazing what they're doing. And you end up reaching out to them. And I hope that doesn't change. I hope that stays, that level of sharing, because I remember when we were like on a semi-online, offline world, especially in the film industry, where, you know, if you put something online, it's like, whoa, you know, is this ready to show? You know, is this a released, you know, signed off approval footage we can put on or frame? Whereas like on my movie at the moment, every week I'm putting behind the scenes, and what we found is people are just, you know, are queuing up to know what else is coming out. When is this movie coming out? And now I'm finding our financiers and you know, our distribution companies are like embracing. They go, wow, we should have done that ages ago. Like, this is way better than spending a massive P&A print and advertising campaign to get movie posters out and stuff. So I hope the element of sharing knowledge as well, because I wouldn't have, to be honest, I wouldn't be in my position right now making an animated film if it wasn't for the amazing people that share knowledge on YouTube, on the forums, Discord, and all those platforms. So I hope that stays.
I was just trying to talk and I was muted then, but thank you. And I agree. I think that those behind the scenes things, is, you know, to Sarah's dream as well, it doesn't detract away from the magic. I think it helps to understand the magic and helps people think, well, you know, how could I do that? How could I be involved? Right, so it's time for Q&A now from our audience. We've got loads and loads of questions, so I will try my best to get through them all, but I'm sure that everyone's got really interesting responses. So we've got a question from Seb. I'll throw this one to Conor. So China is a fascinating market, and I'd love to know if any international producers have ever actually cracked the market.
Well, I mean, it depends on what sector you're talking about, but the answer is yes. Many have. I mean, if you're talking about the film space, let's talk about that for a moment. Yeah, I mean, a large portion of Chinese box office revenues are generated from what I describe as foreign films. So yes, you know, China is a massive market for international producers in the film space, but it's heavily regulated. So there's a limited number of Chinese films that are allowed to be distributed in China per year. So it tends to be those really large Hollywood blockbusters that get access to that market. And so you know, the opportunities for independent producers in China are limited for that reason, because of those restrictive policies. Theater, I mean, again, pointing towards Sarah, RSC is, you know, has a lot of success in China too. And, you know, so is the National Theater. But again, these are big institutions. But China is really interesting in the performing arts space. There's lots of opportunities, unlike film, for independent producers outside of the big cities, outside of Shanghai and Beijing, and outside of the big theaters. And that's just as a result of just the simple size of the audiences there, which are huge. And so what might be an independent or small production or show here in the UK or in Europe could actually have great success and a longer run an opportunity in China, just simply because of the numbers. Looking at the immersive industry space, though, I mean, it's really too early to tell. But you know, if you look at, say, you know, Steam, which I mentioned earlier, if you look at, you know, the gaming sector more broadly, I mean, a lot of the production companies that produce and distribute that stuff in China are foreign producers, and they may work as co-producers with Chinese companies, but you know, they've had massive successes, and many produce titles specifically for the Chinese market. The one thing I'll say though is, don't underestimate the complexity of tapping into that market. You know, unlike in the US and in Europe, Brexit aside, there are trade routes that have existed for decades, if not longer, whether, you know, online or offline, and China is essentially still relatively a new market, and that infrastructure and those trade routes sort of aren't as mature as they would be on this side of the world. And that creates a complex overhead. You need good partners. You need good local partners to help you navigate that complexity. And I would say, is if you're an international producer, yeah, looking at China, you need friends.
So talking about friends, Jim's actually got a question which segues really nicely into that. He says Chinese restrictions could seem to be potentially balanced through another large country, for example, India. Is it hard to navigate there? So talking about that kind of established trade route, do you have any insight on India for Jim?
I don't, Jim, I'm afraid. What I would say is, if you're looking at an entry point into China, you know, you're looking at Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong as a potential friend. It's a good sort of stepping stone into that larger sort of Southeastern Asian market. India as a consumer of creative products, I'm afraid I don't. You know, they are big players in terms of supporting the production of stuff, but as a consumer of international content, it's not something that's registered with me, I'm afraid.
Okay, so maybe we'll have to run another session on that. That's a really interesting comment. So this question now is for Sarah. So this is from Susan Barbara. First of all, congratulations on Dream. It's a really remarkable achievement. She's curious to see if you think that the process of producing Dream in a COVID-safe environment will have any long-term impacts on live performance production. For example, wider adoption of skeleton cast and crew as standard, increased use of technology, and if so, what will that mean for your sector?
That's a really, really good question, and thank you. I think one of the big shifts will be virtual production tools. So what we can take forward, you know, working with the Unreal Engine allowed us to work remotely. There were huge constraints. It was a safety first production, as all production should be, but in this particular one, a huge amount of work went into the planning of that and ensuring that. And yes, we were working on a much smaller staff on the ground. And there are strengths and weaknesses with that. We really found that, particularly when you make a piece of theatre, the connection in person when you're with your company and you're with the people making it, and the roles that are alongside that, how they're used to having such strong connections on the ground, and so but I think we would look at our structures differently. I think it allows us to internationally collaborate much more connectedly, particularly around the design and the production of that. I think there's huge potential for us to look at the whole technology pipeline for making our work using virtual production tools. And then it also highlighted those moments where human connection is absolutely essential. And I think it allows us to be more nuanced, actually, going forward, and it's definitely a yes and model, and it allows us to take a beat on that, and also be inclusive. So for example, the ways of working when you're looking at developers and coders and programmers alongside people that are used to making a piece of theatre, a company, an acting company, very different ways of working, and so we saw a lot of that connect, and I think there's new processes there that we can really pick off from. Yeah, it was super interesting as a process. The amount of work you saw as an audience member, and then what was behind that was really, there was a huge amount of learning.
Thank you, Sarah. And that segues really nicely into Tom's question. So since we know that the pandemic and subsequent lockdown has exacerbated many of the pre-existing axis of inequality, which some panelists mentioned earlier, how can we ensure that we're learning from all communities as we move forward? Florian, maybe I can send that one to you, because the gaming community is incredibly diverse, but not potentially diversely represented.
Oh, that's a tough one, this, isn't it? So I think overall, I can't claim to be an expert from my research direction on this. But what has improved is that gaming itself, the sort of low end and mid-range hardware has become a lot more accessible. You actually have a lot more of a well-rounded socioeconomic background in esports than you have in many sports. I think there's huge considerations of inclusiveness in regards to female participation. There is a huge element of esports that speaks to people that are neuroatypical and have certain physical disabilities that can not just participate but actually excel in esports tournaments where traditional sports would never give them a venue or a platform. And so I think that's really positive trends. It's not been a central line of inquiry we've been doing, mostly working with the existing esports audience, but that's sort of my response there directly. I'm sure the others have some more refined answers on the device side.
Does anyone have anything to add to Florian's response there? No. Okay, we'll move on to the next question. So this is quite amusing. Paul Whiteman asks, in preparation for his starring role as a virtual firefly in Dream Tomorrow, could Sarah and Haz discuss the potential of cost-effective virtual production and performance capture for live music and performing arts projects which don't have the sorts of budgets that the game industry and big movies have? So Haz, you talked a little bit about budget. So I was wondering when money's going to come up, and the next question's about money as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a really good question. I mean, for example, like the motion capture thing is a very good example. Like I mentioned the whole motion capture suit, you know, the inertia motion capture suit, like XNs and Rococo and all those guys. But, you know, there are other solutions out there. You know, there's a webcam solution where you use your webcam. It takes, you know, the motion tracking from your webcam, and you can apply that onto your avatar or whatever you're performing. And you know, there's a lot of those software that is free beta to download for beta trials. And I think, you know, you don't need to spend a fortune to try to get something that looks fine. Now, of course, you're not going to try and do Avatar in your bedroom because that's just insane, right? Because there's a lot of work that goes into that. But if you are trying to get across your performance from your living room onto an Avatar, there are tons of ways of doing that. You know, and also you could always download things like Unreal Engine or Unity. And and the tutorials on there, you know, the accessibility in terms of the technicality required to do that now is that you can do that. You know, if you're just a performer, and you don't have to be technical, you don't have to be code. I mean, I don't code, I'm not technical at all. But the fact that if you're able to go through a tutorial and figure it out just by going through you can do a lot yourself. In terms of costings, like I would always go for the free solutions first. Like, for example, the way when I did a pitch, I was pitching on a big project and I didn't want to spend money on a pitch because we all know you don't get the money back for your pitch if you don't get it either way, right? So what I do is I go onto the Epic Marketplace, which is the thing that comes with Unreal Engine, and it's free to sign up, and I download all the free assets and I put together a pitch using free assets. So all it's spending is my time, right? And then I pitch that. And I wouldn't be able to do that before. Like a few years ago, I had to hire artists to build specific assets or hire people to do pitch material. Whereas now you can do that a lot for free or cost-effective ways. So there's motion capture is one thing. If you're talking about performance as well, there's you sometimes don't want to do it on your own. Definitely there's Facebook groups. There's one called Virtual Production, which everyone's on that. There's people at all sorts of level, like ILM guys to independent guys in their room doing stuff, and everyone is sharing stuff. And there are people using Vive, the HTC Vive VR trackers to do motion capture, put it on their hands and put in the mark and just moving their hands around, getting finger movements and head movements. And that's just out of the box thinking. So there's several ways of doing things, especially with tech. And I think now is the time to explore those things because they're very accessible.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Haz. There's a very specific question to Sarah, actually, from Anna, and it's, I wonder if Dream is a revenue positive endeavour or if it's seen more as an R&D project to learn for future IP. So you mentioned exploration into commercial models there. Can you expand a little bit?
Thank you so much for asking that question. It's R&D, and it's like all of the live performance demonstrators are R&D. So they can't actually, it's a really, we've got to test the commercialization, not make the commercial part of that. It's a really important part of the deliverables of the project. But what we have got is a repository of data and evidence and information about the future ways we can commercialize this work, which is really, really important. And as we've seen through the pandemic, most of live performance is a ticket sale and also a very, very upfront advance in order to make the work. And that's really challenged the sector phenomenally. So there's a huge opportunity in this sort of work, looking at different commercial models and the way that we commercialize it. And we have to, we absolutely, one of the biggest challenges I've witnessed and experienced is how do we break out of a sector and look at a mainstream audience for this work, knowing there's huge inequity and knowing there's, that not everyone has access to the technology, and that we're in a really privileged position to be able to work with these cutting edge technologies. And then how do we create the audience for that? There has to be a meeting point on that. And that in the commercial models of it, we have to look at ways we can make the work lightly, and then when we get the privilege and the opportunity to research and develop, really be as ambitious and courageous and risk-taking as we possibly can in order to find that audience. And I think that's super important in what we've researched and developed here, and we'll share all those learnings quite openly over the next 6 months. So yeah, I thank you for that question.
I think that's going to be good news for everyone, the dissemination of all of the learnings, because there's just been so much that's been garnered over this period. Talking about moving back productions into venues, Katie asks, how do cultural venues ensure that they're able to invest time and budget into virtual or hybrid delivery? So I don't know who would like to pick that up, and maybe Conor, I don't know if you've spoken to anyone who specifically budgeted or is planning for this virtual or hybrid delivery, or whether people are more thinking, right, we're going to go back and we're going to try and get back to normal.
I think it's going to be split, isn't it? I mean, I'll hand this back to Sarah, but I'll say one thing about sort of virtual production techniques and what that does and what's enabled that. It's really interesting that the video games sector or the video games infrastructure has become the sort of meta universe for other industries to sort of gather. It's become the universe of universes, and I think that's really interesting that this was of the moment, that whether it's the Unreal Engine or other infrastructure has existed to facilitate these things, because I think it would have been a very different world for the creative industries if that infrastructure didn't already exist, that we're able to sort of coalesce around the meta universe of the video games to help get our work out there. But look, after and that will continue, and the work again that sort of Sarah and the Audience of the Future program is doing to really test and stress test these technologies is going to persist, and it will the echoes of that will last for many years. And now the expectation will be for many of these performing arts spaces to also provide that offer. I mean, Florian made a point earlier around, the number of people that can sit in Old Trafford versus the number of people who get to see Man United. And that's the same for the RSC or the National Theatre or any theatre around the country or elsewhere, where there will be people in this space, but everybody else will also want to experience that in some way. And that's going to be really exciting. So this hybridity, this idea of being in the space in some way while not being in the space, it's just something that's going to be by default, and what forms that takes is going to be really interesting to see.
Thank you. Sarah, did you have anything to add from an RSC perspective on the kind of virtual stroke hybrid return?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can't underestimate the profound shift in how our audiences will be with us coming out of this, and that will take some time. But I think previously we've always looked at remote audiences as being really far away, and I think that the paradigm shift is that remote audiences are not far away, they're really close. And how do we provide an experience that connects with them equitably alongside and with connected to an in-person audience? And that for me is the huge next step challenge, is that the rituals around cultivating those audiences and giving those audiences the best experience possible is not a like for like experience. We've been used to a traditional broadcast model, and we know that audiences look at a distributed model in and how we become more personalized with our remote audiences and provide those different connection points. I think it will be a yes and model going forward. I also think it will allow us to become super live in person. We can dial up the nuances of that. So it's not a binary issue, it's definitely, but it will all take investment, it will all take time, it will take risk, it will take things that work, things that fail. We must celebrate those risks and the courageousness of them in order to find those ways. And I think that audiences, for me, it's about audiences are showing up and they want to connect, and it's how we give them the best experience possible.
I think that's really, really resonant. And that kind of segues into a question that Martina has asked. She says that there was an interesting discussion in the audience research panel about the cultural phenomenon of remixing and origination of new content forms on TikTok. Are the panel excited about this or any other channels that have emerged during lockdown? I was talking to someone from the Philharmonia the other day, and they said they'd passed, I think, I can't remember how many thousands of viewers on their YouTube channel, and their demographic is traditionally much older. So the fact that this older audience had gone onto YouTube and subscribed, I thought was absolutely brilliant, because, you know, they couldn't interact live, so they were doing it at home, and that really warmed my heart to hear that. Anyone been doing anything on TikTok? Clubhouse?
Not really TikTok, but I can speak to the sort of an audience that's really digitally native, and you know, it kind of speaks to the sort of amazement of creativity not being just part of the production side, but also part of the consumption side. I think the continuous shift and convergence between consuming and creating, and that dialogue that people have, not just with the productions, you know, juxtaposing maybe some elements they've seen and clipping it and sending it back with a lol, or turning it into a meme, or you know, do all these really creative things that are witty, that actually that are contentful, that add to the conversation, but also then the creative dialogue between the audience, and observing that, and how, you know, new ways of you know, injecting content and new tools. And again, speaking to that distributed nature that has pointed out, you know, it's just that being out there and putting your stuff out there, and then you create these layers of creative dialogue on top, which I think is a fascinating thing. So hopefully that speaks a little bit to the question.
Does anyone else have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, we've all heard the story about those amazing kids in, I think it's in Nigeria or one of those countries in Africa, where these kids were creating remix trailers. They were making low budget versions of the trailer. And one of them was, I think, was this big Chris Hemsworth action movie. So, like, you know, there's kids in a cardboard box driving around with a cardboard steering wheel, and they're just doing it because they don't have expensive cameras, they don't have, you know, props, so they're making the stuff very lo-fi, and they put it out on YouTube. And the Russo brothers, you know, the directors of the Avengers, reached out and said, this is like amazing, like, what do you need to do this, you know, to do the stuff properly? So they sent them over like cameras and gear and kit, and those kids, like, if you see the video, those kids are like, oh my god, like they're crying like with joy. JJ Abrams did some stuff and sent some stuff out there. And I think if it wasn't for that nature of remixing and paying homage, or making, you know, homage fake trailers and stuff, those kids would never have been discovered, or even, you know, like caught the attention of Hollywood executives, or just people, or an audience in general. So I think I'm a huge fan of the whole remixing thing. You know, when I was working in video games, I was doing remix of like music videos using video game footage and live action, putting it out there. And that's how I got, you know, discovered for my first job in VFX. So I think the whole TikTok experience and remixing, I think it's great. Absolutely.
I completely agree. And it always brings a smile to my face to see, you know, an inventive remix. I think it's really fun. Just as we've got 2 minutes left, so I just wanted to finish off with a reflection and question from Tom. So he says, I think what Florian was saying about reflection is really important. Creativity sometimes requires time and distance. While it's obviously important that we continue to try and think ahead as we find our way out of the current situation, what should we be doing to make sure we're documenting our process in the best way to enable us to make the best sense of it as a picture emerges? So Sarah's going to be sharing some research, Conor's sharing his too. What other ways can we document? How would you recommend doing this? This is to anyone who wants to take it.
I mean, I can just quickly jump in. I'm a huge fan of behind the scenes. So, like, you know, I'm documenting not in paperwork. I mean, I don't like writing long documents. So I'm doing constant behind the scenes. Like, you know, this is how we're using metahumans, a new thing for Unreal Engine. This is how we're doing motion capture. This is how we're doing this. And I find putting that stuff, and you keep it short. You keep it like a minute, 30 seconds, and you just put that as a form of documentation for the world to see, so it inspires people, but also for me as well to look back, oh, this is the thing that we struggled last year, and now we can do it better. I think it's important to constantly document. Like, my whole team are remote, and when they send me stuff, I always tend to do a video capture using the, you know, whatever video capture device to show, so that I can review, and I store all of that. even though that's just a review process, but I find it fascinating. I'm like, oh, wow, you did this. And then when it comes to the making of featurettes or just sharing stuff, or you go into a financier or an investor to say, hey, we need some investment, this is what we're doing, you have that material already. So constantly document in video or docs.
Sorry, Haz, I'm going to have to cut you off. We've got 20 seconds left. I just want to say thank you so much to all of the panelists and all of the questions from the audience. That was absolutely fascinating discussion. And I feel really, really honoured that I was able to chair the panel today and hear some of your reflections and insights. So I hope to meet you all face to face very soon and have a cup of tea together. Thank you so
Jessica.
Much. Thank you,
Bye.
Jessica. Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you. Nice, Jessica. Nice, guys.
Bye.
I don't think I'll ever forget my first day at Factory 42. News of a possible national lockdown because of COVID had just broken.
We had actually launched a new experience in the Metro Centre in Gateshead.
Had moved into full production and ready for a performance in June 2020.
We had created and established an amazing story with Aardman. All our technology was in place.
2020 seemed to hold so much promise, yet all across the creative sector, the impacts of the pandemic were felt. And this is a story of some of the projects that were supported by the Audience of the Futures Challenge and the Creative Industries Clusters program, and how even the best laid plans were disrupted.